Welcome to the Carriker Chronicles, the People Show. Checking the pulse of Husker Nation, brought to you by DPS Concrete Construction. Check them out at dpsconstruction.net. Also, carrikerchronicles.com. Ladies and gentlemen, it's where all your Husker sports hopes and dreams will come true. It's just science. All right, we're not in the studio. No, this is not a gut reaction. We just got back from New York. Oh, we got a whole bunch of memorabilia, things of that nature. All right. We thought this was kind of cool. We're going to hang it up behind us, but we're not in studio. We'll get unpacked. We'll get ready. We'll get back in studio for the show tomorrow night that we're going to be doing. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe. Ring that notification bell. I did my first ever YouTube live for my gut reaction to the Pinstripe Bowl, Nebraska versus Boston College. If you missed that, go back and check it out. And as I mentioned, we're going to be putting out another show tomorrow night talking about our coordinators, Dana Holgorsen, John Butler, and Ed Foley. Tomorrow night, going to be putting that show out. So again, subscribe, ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of the stuff we're putting out here on the Carriker Chronicles. Also, there's going to be a very special interview that's going to go out Wednesday morning, New Year's Day morning. Now, if you're like me, all right, if you agree with me, while there's obviously still things that need to be improved upon, but you believe Nebraska has very real momentum going into this offseason, then smash the like button. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, the white paper is back. No more yellow paper here on the Carriker Chronicles. These are my final grades for Matt Rhule and Nebraska's season, and something has to be done about the special teams going forward. I'm going to give everyone a grade tonight, and I'll dive more in depth into everything tomorrow as far as the future as well. When it comes to the offense, all right, I didn't do as much of an in-depth statistical analysis as I normally do because we have different offensive coordinators, different defensive coordinators. The special teams coordinator is, however, the same. So I dove more into the stats there on the ride home, which is pretty much a lot of what I did, was a lot of digging into this stuff on our way home from New York. Passing yards per game. Offensively, our offense, passing yards per game, 63rd in the country, averaging 223 pass yards per game. Now, the last three games, I had to dive specifically into Dana. All right, the last few games he was here as Nebraska's offensive coordinator, we averaged 240 pass yards per game. So the pass yards per game went up, the total yards per game went up, the points per game went up, yards per rush went up, but I'll get into that in a second. Yards per rush, 99th in the country, 3.7 yards per carry on the season, 4.3 yards per carry. These last few games under Dana Holgorsen. Randomly, New Mexico is number one in the country, averaging 6.8 yards per carry. Notre Dame's number two, and then around 5 yards is Boise. I thought it'd be higher with Ashton Genty. All right, yards per game offensively. Total yards per game, Nebraska's 93rd in the country. Right now, we're 63rd, 99th, and 93rd. Not where we want to be. 353 total yards per game, but under Dana, 392 total yards per game is what we averaged the last few games. Points per game, 98th in the country, 22 points per game for the season as a whole. The last few games under Dana, 25 points per game. Obviously, we had that 44-point outpouring against Wisconsin, which was the most amount of points that had happened under the Matt Rhule tenure here as the head coach in the University of Nebraska. The most amount of points Nebraska had scored since they dropped 56 on Northwestern in 2021. My grade for the offense. Okay. And I kind of waited a little bit the last few games, a little bit more, but I had to grade the season as a whole. This is the final grades for the 2024 season. All right, in the last few games, we moved the ball a lot better. Think back to Wisconsin, think back to Iowa, think back to Boston College. We moved the ball well. We just didn't take care of it very well against Iowa or Boston College, so I had to factor all that stuff in. All right, and after the first 9 games, the grade would have been much lower than this. Okay. The last 3 games raised it, and ensuring that Dana was going to be here next year, because that decision happened during this season. So I had to factor that into this season as an important decision that was made, brought the grade back up. It's not as high as I want it to be, as anybody would want it to be, but I have it as C+ right now. And again, it was lower than that. It got brought up to a C+ offensively with some of the things that I mentioned. You look at the bowl game. All right, we were 3 of 11 on third downs. Got to convert more of those third downs. All right, Boston College was 6 of 12. They were 0 of 4 on fourth down. That was the difference in the game. They were 0 of 4. We were 3 of 4 on fourth downs. And I thought this was interesting. We threw the ball exactly 32 times and ran the ball exactly 32 times versus Boston College, an average 4.0 yards per carry. When it comes to the defense, yards per game on the season, and then I'm going to go specifically into the Boston College game because that's the one game we have under John Butler as our defensive coordinator. Yards per game. All right, we were 66th in the country, giving up 221 yards per game on the season. 301 yards is what we allowed versus Boston College. Now, versus Boston College, we gave up pass yards per game, I should say. 221 pass yards per game, 301 pass yards per game versus Boston College is what we allowed, 221 on the season as a whole per game. Boston College got more total yards than I would have liked, to be honest with you. But the defense was put in so many difficult positions. Had the goal line stand time after time. The special teams put them in a tough position. And they were able to make the plays way more often than not. They only gave up one offensive touchdown to the Eagles in that game. Okay, yards per rush, 3.4 yards per carry is what we allowed on the whole as a season versus Boston College, 1.8. They couldn't run the ball against us very well. But on the season, we're 17th in the country, yards per carry. All right, and what we allowed. Total yards per game, allowed 320 total yards per game. It was pass yards per game earlier. 320 total yards per game, which is 16th in the country. Top 20, top 16. All right, against Boston College, again, we gave up a few more yards, 348 is what we allowed versus the Eagles. Points per game. All right, we allowed 21 points per game on the season as a whole, which is 20th in the country. Again, top 20, top 15, top 16 type defense. Against Boston College, the score was 20-15, but the defense really only gave up 6 actual points. The other 9 were due to the special teams. So my grade for the defense. All right. And again, this is one of the top 20 defenses in the country. Now, we had a few lapses at times this year, the second half versus Illinois, the Indiana game as a whole, the first 2.5 quarters versus UCLA, but they were by far our best unit for the Huskers this year, and frankly, the past 2 years. All right, I gave them a B+. Some of those lapses kept it from being in that A range, but a solid B+ for the defense. All right, the special teams. All right, and shout out to Andy Jurassic, who helped me look up some of these special team stats as well. On the season, we're 71st in the country overall on special teams. We made 68% of our field goals. At one point, we made 8 in a row. It seems like a long time ago. We allowed 10 blocks on the year. 6 of them were PATs and field goals. 4 of them were punts. We averaged 18.43 yards per kickoff return. Now, Ja'Cory Barney had 13 returns for 268 yards, but that didn't happen until Dana joined the team. He wasn't back there returning kicks. All right, a total of 387 return yards on the season. As far as average punt return, this is just wow. Average punt return was 4.87 yards. All right, per return. The longest was 13 yards for the entire season. We had 21 fair catches, allowed 536 kickoff return yards for our kickoff coverage unit. Really, the only thing Nebraska was great at this year, or decent at on special teams, was blocking kicks. All right, last year we ranked 3rd. Matt Rhule talked about, and I quote, "We need an entire overhaul on special teams," end quote. Now, when you think about the 10 blocks in 13 games, that's almost 1 blocked kick of some sort per game on average. We're last in the Big Ten in punt returns and tied for last in net punting. Honestly, this is not acceptable for a high school team. And if I coached Jacob's team for years in middle school, I would have said, hey, we got to make a change if this were middle school. Okay, so it's inexcusable, it's unacceptable, it's a liability. You think about the fact that special teams single-handedly almost cost us the bowl game versus Boston College. Think back to Rutgers. Rutgers started with the ball at our 2-yard line, the 28-yard line that game. Our defense had to stand tall, almost handed Rutgers that game and a couple other games as well. Now, in tomorrow's show, I'm going to dive into why Ed Foley, as of right now, as I'm recording this video, is still here. Will he still be here? Who could replace him? What happens if they don't replace him? And what I think should happen. Right now, my grade for the special teams, the options for me were either F+, F, or F-. I thought an F+ would be an insult to pluses. I actually had an F- is what I was going to say. And my wife was like, well, they had a couple of nice fakes that they converted this year. All right, as far as a couple of fake punts, the fake field goal didn't work. I was like, all right, I'll give him just a regular F. Not that that's great or what anybody wants, but that's my grade for the special teams. All right, before I get to the overall grade, a couple of interesting facts I got for you fine folks at home. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, DPS Concrete Construction. Check them out at dpsconstruction.net. They are your local concrete experts, ladies and gentlemen. Concrete work, retaining wall work. There is nobody better than DPS Concrete Construction. Jason Armstrong does a phenomenal job running that company. Also, Allen Capital Group. They've done my family's finances for over a decade. They have offices in Grand Island, Ogallala, and Omaha. All right. They have next level solutions for next level needs, for next level solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, check them out at allencapgroup.com. That's ALLENCAP group.com. All right. Now, when you think about the grade as an overall whole, I went back and I looked at the whole schedule, and I got some notes here up in the corner and down low. So here are the things that stood out to me. All right, 6-6. I mean, I said that would be barely acceptable before the season started. I'm like, I predicted 8-4. Okay. I said I would have been happy with 7-5 going to a bowl game. I said 6-6 was barely acceptable. Well, it's what we did. It's not very appealing to the eye to see 6-6. Then you go to the bowl game, you win the bowl game, and 7-6. Now, a bowl game's worth more than just one dub, in my humble opinion, and it gives you momentum going into the offseason. So all that had to be factored in. So you look at some of the streaks that ended this year, though. Some of the monkeys that we got off our backs, so to speak, this year. Beat Wisconsin. Was it 12 years since we'd beaten Wisconsin? I can't remember. 9 years, whatever it was. Maybe we'd beaten them once in 12 years. Whatever that streak was, we ended the Wisconsin streak, if you want to call it that. Made a bowl game, ended that streak. All right, won a bowl game, ended that streak. Again, that was since 2016. We hadn't made a bowl game, if you hadn't heard yet. 2015 was the last time we won a bowl game. We beat UCLA in the Foster Farms Bowl. We actually ended that year 6-7, despite winning the bowl game. Remember, we were 5-7 going into the bowl game because 5-7 teams get to go to bowl games for some reason. And ending the year with a winning record, which we hadn't done since 2016. So kind of all these streaks and all these monkeys that were on our back are now off of our back, so to speak. And we beat Colorado. And I know some folks look at that game and they're like, did we put too much into that game? No, we put the right amount into that game. Can you imagine if we'd have lost 4 straight to them people? We'd have never heard the end of it. We put the right amount into that game. What happened is we didn't continue to improve at an appropriate rate after the game. So beating Colorado was huge in my humble opinion. Now, I look at this schedule, and I really saw it as the first 3.5 games. Okay, UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, and half of Illinois. Remember that first half of Illinois? We dominated them. They made adjustments, and we didn't adjust back in the second half or in overtime. So I saw it as the first 3.5 games of the year where we looked really good. Remember, we were ranked at that point? Then I saw it as the next 6.5 games, which would include the second half of Illinois, then Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, Ohio State, UCLA, USC. All right, that didn't go quite the way we wanted. And then I basically saw it as the last 3 games of the season, which was Wisconsin, which was Iowa. I know we lost that game. The way it was ugly, and Boston College. But you think back to the first 3.5 games, the middle 6.5, and the last 3. That's kind of how I saw it. The first 3 and the last 3, we were 4-2. Okay, and you think back to Illinois, where, what was it, a 34-yard missed field goal away from beating them, a wide open tight end that Rhule makes that pass 19 out of 20 times, 95% of the time. All right, and obviously Iowa was what it was, but my point is, and then that middle 6.5 is what kind of was the most frustrating part of the year for Husker fans. When you think about some of the games that I mentioned, that all had to be factored into this grade. Let me find my grade. So for the defense, I gave a B+. For the offense, I gave a C+. So, hey, we're off to a great start. Like, we're going to have a pretty good grade here, right? Special teams, that F, that brings down the average. I also had to factor in some of the games I mentioned where we got a little bit out-coached at times, okay, because that did happen. But I've also got to factor in the last month where Matt Rhule made some key decisions, some key moves, hiring some of the guys that he hired and bringing in some of the guys that he brought in, whether it's Holgerson, whether it's Braden, whether it's D. Shorts at the wide receiver, receivers coach, which was really Holgerson's guy. But I think a lot of these moves, our coaching staff, we'll see what happens with special teams, I believe as an overall whole is better going into next year. Those decisions were made during the season because the offseason and the in-season all blend together in college football. I had to factor that all together. Now, admittedly, part of me was like, oh man, I want this grade to be higher. I really do. But I've also got to keep it real. And I do fully expect this grade to be higher next year. But I got it as a C+ right now. overall grade for Nebraska's football season right now, in my mind, is a C+. Okay. You know what? I got a couple of interesting things, but I'm going to save it for the show tomorrow. Okay, I teased them earlier in the show, but I'm going to save them for the show tomorrow. You're going to find it very, very interesting, some of the things I've got for you and reasons for excitement as we look forward to the future. But that's my final grades, all right, for this past Nebraska football season. Defense, B+. Special teams, F. Offense, C+. As an overall whole for the team, coaching included, everything, C+. Check out CarrikerChronicles.com. Here are my questions for you fine folks at home. Number 1, what grade would you give the offense? Number 2, what grade would you give the defense? Number 3, what grade would you give special teams? Number 4, what would your overall grade be for Matt Rhule, Nebraska? Go Big Red Nose. Remember to throw the ball.